Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial. This time we're going to see an unfolding technique for which I was inspired from Paul Clement's headphones breakdown video that he uploaded a few days ago. And if you haven't watched it, I really recommend you to watch it. He makes a masterful use of the Cinema 4D tools, and he has plenty of really great ideas. And he uses them to make a really polished and great looking final TV spot. But this breakdown video is one of the best breakdown videos that I've seen. So at some point he creates the surface of a headphone by unfolding polygons, and I made an example here of what we're going to do. So this is the effect we're going to achieve. So let's go to Cinema and start. Let's start by making a polygon, and it's a little big at first. Let's select both the width and height and make them 50, hold Control and hit Enter to make both of them. And let's go to our MoGraph menu, hold Alt and drop it under a cloner. Now the cloner automatically offsets on the Y-axis, so let's bring this to 0 and make our Z-axis 50, because that's the width of the polygon. Now we can make as many as we want, but let's make it 10, so our viewport will go a little fast for the tutorial. And a problem that we'll soon realize is that if we try to rotate it, the polygons rotate from their center. Now this will not help us a lot for the unfolding. If we have a floor, we can see, let's select the cloner again, that they're going through the floor. And in fact, if I bring the video here and let's observe that their pivot point, let's see this polygon over here, their pivot point is at the edge of the object. So let's go back and disable our cloner and hide the floor, and let's make the polygon editable and hit L or click this button to enable the axis mode. And we're going to bring the axis back to -25. We can type it here on the coordinates manager to bring it back to the edge of the polygon. Let's disable axis mode, enable the cloner, and I'm going to also hit NB to enable the lines on the viewport. So if we try to rotate now, we can see it's rotating around the edge. And if I enable the floor, we can see it's no longer going through when it's rotating. So that's great. Let's disable the floor again. Now let's give it some thickness. Let's go to the simulate menu and hold Alt to parent it under a cloth NURBS. We don't want any subdivision, just some thickness here. And we can still try that it's working. Great. Now how to make it into a disk? Let's select our cloth NURBS and parent it under a second cloner. And by default it's linear. Let's change this to radial. We want it on the XZ plane, which is a horizontal plane. And we can sort of create a circular shape here, but we can have all these intersections, so we need to fix that. Disable the cloner. We want to make it, becoming more narrow near the one end, and I'm going to use a deformer to do that. Let's bring our taper deformer. If we play with the strength parameter, we can see it's working on the Y-axis. So let's bring our rotate tool, click the red axis and hold shift to quantize the rotations, so we will go exactly at -90 to align it with our cloner. Now they need to be under the same parent in order for it to work, so bring it under the cloth NURBS and let's select our cloner. We can see that the size is 500. Let's make it 500 on its Y, and let's bring it here on the center, which will be 250. And we know the width is 50, And about the height, we don't care. About the thickness, just bring it a little lower. Now if we use the strength to 100, we can see that it works, but it has this curvature that we can disable from the curvature parameter. So now let's enable our cloner, and we can see it's upside down. We can fix it directly from the cloner, but I think it's more proper to show you how to change the pivot here. I'm just going to use a null object and bring the null object to the point right at 500. So I'm going to parent the whole first cloner with the cloth NURBS and everything under the null. So now it's like the pivot of this whole object is at this point. Let's name this slice pivot, or just name this slice actually. And if we enable our radial cloner, we can see that it's now correctly, rotated, but they still intersect. So let's bring our radius to 0. That's perfect. Now let's increase our count until it fits as good as possible. I think around here. And it's not perfect. You can do the math if you want to make it perfect, but I'm just going for the easy way right now. And in fact, if you render this, you won't notice much. So let's disable our taper here on the viewport with lights, because it's a little distracting. All right. Now we have both our cloners, we have our slice. How do we animate this? Let's make a plane effector. And by default, we don't know which cloner to put it. Well, the correct answer is the nested cloner, because that's the one who has the individual polygons. The other cloner has whole slices. So go to the effector list of the nested cloner here and drop the plane effector. And we see that it kind of raises them. And we don't want to raise them. Let's go to our plane effector, and disable the position. We want to rotate them. And it's the position P here. And we can see it's working. So let's enable the fall off, make it spherical, and make it a little bigger with the scale. Great, but now they all rotate at once, and we can see all of them as well. Now the plane effector is very good at hiding clones, and the way to do that is go to the parameter here and go to the color, to the other, scroll down and enable visibility. And for the visibility to hide them, you need to reduce the maximum value here of the plane effector to 50. And now everything that is inside the red circle, which represents 100% strength for the plane effector, will be disabled. So now using the fall off, we can rotate the clones, the visible clones. And let's go to our fall off here. Let's make it a little more rigid. Let's bring it to 35%. And let's go to our parameter and play with the rotation until we see something that fits. I think around 360 is good enough. So if we play with our scale now, we can see that exactly when the clones are visible, what kind of rotation they have. So now we kind of created this folding effect, but it all happens at once and it's not convincing at all. So we're going to use a random effector to randomize. Let's select our nested cloner that we know is the one whom we need to apply the effectors to, and make a random effector. Let's go to the parameter, disable the position. What we want is to use the random effector to randomize the way that the plane effector affects the clones. And we're going to do that with the weight transform. And to do what it does, Let's see from upside down because we have the cloth nerves here. Let's disable our plane effector and select the nested cloner here, go to the transform tab and enable weight. Now we can see the weights of the clones. So if I increase the weight transform on an effector, we can see how it affects them. It starts to color them, where yellow is 100% and red is 0%. So we can see that by default the random effector has the same weights in every circle, and this will not be useful for randomizing. That's because it randomizes every clone, but then it is cloned radially. But we can change the randoms effector mode into a world space mode, such as turbulence, to have a more random effect. And now we can see it's kind of subtle, but we can play with the min-max values to make it more obvious. Since there is no negative weighting, we can increase the minimum to 0. And we can decrease the animation speed, so this will not be distracting. And we can also adjust the scale a little bit to make it more random. I think around here is enough. So let's enable our plane effector now and go to our nested cloner and disable the display actually. So we can see that it does nothing. In order to see the effect of the weight, we need to go to the fall off tab and decrease the weight value here. And now we see that it does again nothing. And that is because the plane effector on the nested cloner, let's go to the effector list, is executed before the random effector. So it cannot read the weights of the random effector, it only reads 0. So let's bring it after the random effector. And now we can see the randomized effect we have. Let's try to play a little with the scale here. And maybe these are a bit too random. We want to have a little order in this, so we can play with the weight value here to blend how much randomness we want. And then now if we use the plane effector at around 50%, we can see that they're random enough, but they're also orderly. You know, they have this rule that they're going towards the center. That's great. So we have this effect already created, and it's controlled by the plane effector here by the scale value. Let's make it easier to control by making a simple 0 to 100% slider. So I'm going to select my setup here and hold Alt G to group it and name it unfolding polygons. And I'm going to the user data here and add the user data. Let's name this unfold. And let's make it a float slider from 0 to 100%, press OK. We have our unfold value here. And we want to drive the planes effector scale parameter. So let's right click here, go to the animation, and you cannot see it, there is a command set driver. So we click that. Let's expand this, go to our plane effector, go to the scale here. Let's make it as big as we want for the 0%. So around here. Alright, so it's 1600, let's make it 1700. And right click on it, go to animation, and we have two set driven parameters, one absolute, one relative. So this is not going from 0 to 100%, so it's not absolute, it's relative. And when we click it, it creates an espresso expression with a very simple setup here. Is these two parameters connected via a range mapper to map their values. So we want the 0% to be 1700%, and we want the 100% to become actually scale 0, right? Let's bring this to 0. Sorry. So when our slider here will be 0%, the scale value will be 1700%. When the scale value, when the slider is 100%, the scale value will be 0%. And if we try it here, we can see that we have all the control we want from a single slider. Great. And now, as a final touch, we can animate it. Let's add a couple of keyframes. And we can go to select our nested cloner, go to MoGraph, and add a delay effector to add some overlapping action. Let's go to our parameter, our effector here, and change the mode to spring. Let's hit play. And we can see that very organically it's working. So actually the delay effector also had a side effect here. It changed the timing of the plane effector. So now our slider is already at 28% and it just started. And so we can change a little the espresso setup. Let's take a look at our scale value just before the clone starts showing up. So it's at 1000, around 1300. So we can reduce this to 1300. So now it will start around 0. Let's hide the plane effector, it's a little distracting. And let's see if it's working properly. Well, we can still see a clone. So let's try to raise it a little bit. The delay effector can have this kind of side effects because it's trying to blend values. And we can still see this. Maybe I'm going to decrease the randomness a little bit. Alright, maybe at 60% here. Alright, so I hope you will find this useful, and see you next time.